Welcome to this first short recorded video for Module 5 on datasets, web scraping, and reading and writing files. This initial video will just be going over the big picture of what we're going to do in this notebook with this part of the course module. And the idea is to first just give a high level overview of web scraping. So I have some links that I encourage you to click on and explore and read about. You should probably spend 15 or 20 minutes just reading and thinking about some of the concepts that are presented here in the big picture before you start this notebook. So to discuss web scraping, we first provide an analogy and then some useful terminology. An analogy. You've probably actually acted as a human web scraper at some point by using copy and paste. For instance, suppose you wanted to complain about the Broncos roster construction to a friend. You may go to their roster webpage, so click here, and if you were writing an email, you might look at this roster data and copy and paste maybe some information from a table, and I'll just not have them check any information on me, and then send it to a friend and say, oh, I can't believe that Calvin Anderson, I'm not trying to pick on Calvin Anderson, is the tackle at this size. Maybe he needs to be 20 pounds heavier in order to be effective, although 300 already seems like he's quite a big guy. So I don't know, whatever your complaint is, you might do that. Now you're basically acting like a web scraper. Whatever the reason you want to use the data is kind of beside the point. As soon as you're copying and pasting, you're just web scraping. The basic idea of a web scraper without the human component is to automate this otherwise mundane process. For instance, while a single copy and paste of roster data into a single email may not seem that annoying, imagine that you wanted to put the contents of various rosters into multiple emails because you are managing an email list for a sports website. You are going to get really annoyed very quickly with having to constantly check for updates on the rosters across all NFL teams. However, there are some issues with this. As a person, as a human being, you can use your judgment as to what data are relevant on a given web page, no matter what the format is in which they're presented. In other words, even if we are unsure of how the data will appear that we are looking for, we know it when we see it. This is actually a uniquely human trait that an automated web scraper simply does not possess. So let's look at some terminology. Fetching in web scraping refers to the downloading of a web page. In the analogy, this is like copying the entire web page. This is what your browser, let's say you're using Chrome like I'm using, or Firefox or Safari, whatever it is, does when you view the page, which is why you can still view the contents of a web page even if you lose your connection to the internet. So if I was to turn off my Wi-Fi right now, this notebook, for instance, which I'm on the hub, even though I'm not connected to the network and I'm certainly not connected to my hub anymore, it's not like this page goes away. It's in my web browser. It's been fetched. The contents have been fetched. It doesn't mean I can necessarily interact with the contents and links will stop working, but all the contents that I'm viewing will still be there. Scraping refers to the extraction of data from the downloaded contents of a web page. In this analogy, this is determining what part of the copied web page data to paste. The computers are only as smart as we are. When we look at a web page, we only see what I would call relevant information on a web page. A web scraper will load all the data of a web page as raw HTML code through a fetch command. This will include metadata describing how things are supposed to look on the web page, as well as any other behind the scenes information. So this is often what happens. I think if you ever press, like for me on a Windows machine that I'm on, F12, you notice all this information pops up here. And this is, if this just looks like nonsense, this is the type of information that the computer is seeing. But it's not presenting it to you in this format, it's presenting it to you in this nice visible format. So we often don't want to look at raw HTML, we want to look at how it's supposed to be rendered. But the computer only really understands the behind the scenes information, and you're trying to tell it what part of the information in this format matters, but it doesn't see this format. It sees the information that produces this format. So this generally means that in order to construct a useful web scraper, we, meaning us as human beings, have to understand something about the HTML structure of websites and how the data we wish to analyze from these websites is presented on those websites. This allows us to scrape only the data we want from this mess of HTML data. Consequently, web scrapers are usually built to explore web pages belonging to a single website. So they are often not as universally useful as you think. You have to modify them for every type of website you want to look at. For instance, you may create a web scraper to optimally collect statistics on various NBA players available from the website ESPN.com and their NBA page within that website, where each individual athlete has a separate profile web page within this website. For example, you could see Jimmy Butler. And so here's an example of a web page that has lots of data for him, for Jimmy Butler. And you could look at the stats. There's other links within this that contain more information. Here's his regular season statistics. And then there's these links within this page to find that seem somewhat hidden. Whoa. And then there's videos that can play. And I don't want to get into copyright issues, so we're just going to go ahead and close that. So you could try to create a web scraper to optimally kind of go through and crawl through the whole web page in such a way that you can get data on every player from every team in order to, let's say, manage a fantasy website. Now, there's, of course, ethical issues with this. Web scraping comes along with web scraping, there are some important legal and ethical concerns. If you think of a web scraper as a bot, which you should, then once this bot is tuned to a website and, let's say, turned loose, it can clearly gather data much faster than even an army of human users possibly could. Subsequently, if you use the bot too aggressively, which means you spam the website with lots of requests for data, you may break the website. Moreover, the legality of web scraping is also kind of murky. You should check the terms and conditions of a website before you scrape data from it. Find and read the statements about the legal use of data, which usually allow you to scrape data as long as it is not used for commercial purposes. Some websites even have a robots.txt file, TXT, that may explicitly say whether or not they allow web scrapers. So that's the high-level overview of web scraping. The other thing we touch on in this notebook is reading and writing data files. So suppose your institution already possesses the data you need to analyze in a file with a typical format that is understood by common data analysis programs such as Excel or SQL. In this case, you do not need to go searching through websites, but you do need to know how to read the data from the file in order to analyze it. Your analysis may need to be added to this existing file or put in a new file to be used by others. In these cases, you need to know how to write data to a file in a correct format. You may even find yourself reading in data from a file, adding in new data from web scraping, and then saving that data along with any analysis of that data to an altogether new file. So with that in mind, the basic process of reading and writing to files falls under the methods referred to as I/O, meaning input-output, and that's also something that we're going to study in this notebook. So this video was just to give you the overview of the things we're going to learn in this 5th module for the course. There's really just 2 topics that we're learning for the week, web scraping and basic I/O. There's quite a few things that would go into each one, but we're going to keep it focused on these because they go together very well. So that's it for this video. The next one will actually go through how we're going to use a read HTML function with pandas in order to start scraping data from the web. So thanks for listening, and I'll start talking to you in the next video.